Friends, have you ever wondered how people in the Middle Ages managed to survive when their homes were under attack for weeks, sometimes even months? Imagine this. You're trapped inside a stone fortress, surrounded by enemies, with nothing but thick walls and your own courage standing between you and certain doom. How did medieval castles really withstand those brutal sieges? Today, we're diving deep into the secrets, the struggles, and the sheer willpower that kept these mighty fortresses standing. Let's set the scene. It's the year 1297. The air is thick with tension across Europe. Castles dot the landscape, rising above forests and rivers like silent guardians. These aren't just homes for the rich. They're the last line of defense for entire communities. Some castles, like Dover in England or Croc de Chevaliers in Syria, are so massive they look almost impossible to conquer. Their walls are up to 20 feet thick, built from stone that's been hauled for miles. Towers rise high, giving defenders a clear view of any approaching enemy. Inside, hundreds of people, soldiers, servants, even children, live together, always ready for the worst. But why were sieges so common? Well, back then, open battles were risky. Armies could lose everything in a single day. So attackers often chose a different path: surround the castle, cut off supplies, and wait. Sometimes, these sieges lasted for months, even years. The goal was simple: starve the defenders into surrender. But the people inside weren't just sitting ducks. They had tricks, tools, and a stubborn determination to survive. Now, picture this. It's early morning. The sun hasn't even risen yet. Suddenly, the lookout spots movement on the horizon. Enemy banners flutter in the wind. Hundreds, maybe thousands, of soldiers are marching toward the castle. Panic spreads. The gates slam shut. Archers rush to the walls. The siege has begun. For the people inside, every day becomes a test of nerves. Food and water are rationed. The enemy tries everything. Catapults hurl massive stones. Battering rams pound at the gates, and ladders are raised against the walls. Sometimes, attackers even try to dig tunnels underneath, hoping to collapse the walls from below. But the defenders fight back with boiling oil, arrows, and pure grit. Every hour, every day, is a battle for survival. Let's walk through a typical siege, step by step. Day 1. The enemy surrounds the castle, cutting off all roads and paths. No one gets in or out. The defenders quickly gather everyone inside the walls. The first order of business? Secure the food stores and water wells. Without these, the castle won't last long. Day 3. The attackers set up their camps. They build wooden towers and start assembling siege engines, giant catapults called trebuchets, and battering rams. The defenders watch from the walls, ready to sound the alarm at the first sign of trouble. Day 7. The first assault begins. Stones the size of small cars crash into the walls. The ground shakes, but the castle's thick walls hold firm. Defenders pour boiling water and oil on anyone who gets too close. Arrows fly in both directions. The noise is deafening. Day 14. The attackers try a new tactic. They start digging tunnels, hoping to weaken the foundations. But the defenders are ready. They listen for the sound of digging, then counter-dig their own tunnels to intercept the enemy. Sometimes, these underground battles are fought in total darkness, with nothing but torches and swords. Day 30. Supplies are running low. The people inside are tired, hungry, and scared, but they refuse to give up. The castle's design helps. Narrow staircases, hidden passages, and murder holes make it almost impossible for attackers to break through. Day 45. The attackers launch one final, desperate assault. They bring their biggest siege tower right up to the walls. But the defenders set it on fire, sending flames and smoke into the sky. The enemy retreats, defeated. Now, let's pause and think about the people living through this nightmare. Imagine being a child, hearing the thunder of catapults day and night. Or a mother, trying to keep her family calm while food runs out. The castle's lord faces impossible choices. Should he risk a sally, sending his best men out to break the siege, knowing many won't return? Or should he wait, hoping for help that might never come? There are stories of incredible bravery. Defenders who held the walls against all odds. Women who carried water and arrows to the soldiers, risking their lives every day. Even the attackers faced their own fears, disease, hunger, and the constant threat of death. inside those stone walls. Every day was a test of hope and fear. Imagine the silence at night, broken only by the distant shouts of enemy soldiers or the sudden crash of a boulder against the ramparts. People huddled together in the Great Hall, sharing stories, praying, and trying to keep spirits up. Children clung to their mothers, wide-eyed and restless. The castle's cook tried to stretch every last crumb, turning stale bread and dried beans into something that could fill empty stomachs. But it wasn't just about survival. There was pride at stake. For the lord of the castle, surrender meant shame, not just for himself, but for his family and everyone under his protection. For the soldiers, every arrow fired, every stone dropped from the battlements, was a message: we're still here. We won't give up. Sometimes, the defenders would sneak out at night, slipping through secret postern gates to raid the enemy camp or bring back news. These were dangerous missions, and not everyone returned. But every small victory, every stolen sack of grain, every enemy tent set on fire, gave the people inside a little more hope. And then there were the moments of heartbreak, when a wall finally cracked, or when disease crept in because the water ran out. The mood inside could turn from hope to despair in an instant. Some castles held out for months, even years. Others fell in days. But in every siege, the human cost was enormous. So, what happened when the siege finally ended? Sometimes, relief came in the form of a friendly army breaking through the enemy lines. Other times, the defenders simply couldn't hold out any longer. When a castle surrendered, the terms could be harsh. The lord might be taken prisoner, the soldiers executed, and the people inside forced to pay heavy ransoms or worse. But not every story ended in tragedy. In some cases, the defenders negotiated honorable terms, saving lives and property. And sometimes, the attackers simply gave up, worn down by disease, hunger, and the stubborn resistance of the people inside. The aftermath of a siege left deep scars. Buildings were damaged, food stores emptied, and families torn apart. But life went on. People rebuilt, repaired the walls, and prepared for the next threat. Over time, the lessons learned from each siege shaped the way castles were built and defended. Let's take a closer look at how castles evolved to withstand these brutal tests. In the early days, castles were simple wooden structures, easy to build, but also easy to burn. Attackers could set them on fire or knock them down with a few well-placed blows. But as sieges became more common, castle builders got smarter. They switched to stone, making walls thicker and higher. Towers were added at the corners, giving defenders a better view and more places to shoot from. By the 12th and 13th centuries, castles had become complex fortresses. The walls were no longer straight. They were curved or angled to deflect stones and arrows. Gatehouses were reinforced with heavy doors, iron portcullises, and murder holes, small openings above the entrance where defenders could pour boiling oil or drop rocks on anyone trying to break in. Some castles had moats, deep ditches filled with water or spikes, to keep attackers at bay. Drawbridges could be raised in seconds, cutting off the only way in. Inside, spiral staircases wound clockwise, making it harder for right-handed attackers to swing their swords as they climbed. But the real secret weapon was the people. Every man, woman, and child inside the castle played a role. Some carried water to put out fires. Others repaired walls or fetched arrows for the archers. Even the youngest children helped by keeping watch or running messages. Let's break down some of the clever tricks and tools that made castles so tough to crack. First, the walls. They weren't just thick, they were layered. Builders used a core of rubble and mortar, sandwiched between two layers of cut stone. This made the walls strong enough to absorb the shock of catapult stones and battering rams. Next, the towers. These weren't just for show. They gave defenders a higher vantage point, letting them see farther and shoot arrows at attackers from above. Some towers were round, which helped deflect projectiles and made it harder for attackers to use ladders. The gatehouse was often the most heavily fortified part of the castle. Attackers who made it past the drawbridge still had to face a series of doors, each one thicker and stronger than the last. And if they managed to break through, they'd find themselves trapped in a narrow passage, with defenders attacking from above and both sides. Inside the walls, castles had their own wells and cisterns to store water. Some even had secret tunnels leading outside, so defenders could sneak out for supplies or send messages for help. And then there were the weapons. Defenders used longbows, crossbows, and even early cannons to keep attackers at bay. They dropped rocks, poured boiling water or oil, and used giant slingshots called mangonels to hurl stones back at the enemy. But behind all these defenses were real people facing real danger. Take the story of Chateau Gallard in France. In 1203, King Philip II of France laid siege to this mighty fortress held by the English. The defenders, led by Roger de Lacy, held out for months, using every trick in the book. They blocked tunnels, set traps, and even used fake walls to confuse the attackers. But as the siege dragged on, food ran out. People grew weak. In a heartbreaking decision, the commander ordered all the women and children to leave the castle, hoping the French would let them go. Instead, they were trapped between the two armies, suffering in the cold and hunger. It's a reminder that, in every siege, it was the innocent who suffered most. Or consider the defenders of Rochester Castle in England, who in 1215 faced a siege by King John. When the attackers finally broke through the outer walls, the defenders retreated to the keep, the strongest part of the castle. King John's men tried everything, even digging tunnels and setting fires beneath the walls. The defenders held out for weeks, refusing to surrender until they had no choice. After a siege, life was never the same. Survivors had to rebuild not just their homes, but their lives. Some castles were abandoned, left as ruins. Others were repaired and made even stronger. The scars of battle could be seen in every stone, every broken gate, every empty well. But there were also changes in the way people thought about war. Sieges were costly, both in lives and money. Over time, rulers began to look for other ways to settle their differences, through diplomacy, alliances, or even marriage. And as technology advanced, castles themselves began to change. The invention of gunpowder and cannons made even the thickest walls vulnerable. By the 15th century, the age of the castle was coming to an end. But the lessons learned during those long, desperate sieges would never be forgotten. So, what can we learn from the story of medieval castles and their epic sieges? First, it's a story of human resilience. Against impossible odds, people found ways to survive, to fight back, and to protect what mattered most. It's a reminder that, even in the darkest times, hope and courage can make all the difference. Second, it's a lesson in innovation. Every new weapon, every new tactic, forced people to adapt and improve. The castles that survived weren't just the strongest. They were the ones whose defenders learned, changed, and never gave up. And finally, it's a story about the cost of conflict. Behind every stone wall, every arrow, every battle were real people, families, children, friends, caught in the middle of history. Their stories remind us that, while castles may crumble and wars may end, the human spirit endures. Next time you see a castle, whether it's a crumbling ruin or a mighty fortress, remember the people who once stood behind those walls. Remember their courage, their struggles, and their hope. Because in the end, that's what truly withstood the siege. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the heart of medieval castles and the sieges that tested them. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more fascinating history. Until next time, stay curious, and remember, every stone has a story.